Yes, you guessed right. It's summertime.
The main thing, we shouldn't burst it.
And we continue now with the life of Josephus. And if you remember, last week we were dealing with a conflict between Josephus and John of Giscala. Right? And Josephus does not speak highly of John, but John is clearly one of the leaders of the rebellion against Rome. Hang on for 1 second. I will just turn off my cell phone, which is what I should have told everybody to do, and I'll do it myself now. My apologies. Or as I like to say, don't forget to turn your cell phone on after the shir.
Come on in. Come on in. We're done beginning.
So now we're going to see that today we're going to see the plot somewhat thickens between John and Josephus. And if you remember, one of the points that was made last week by Gaia was that if Josephus is focusing so much on these events years after they happened, there must be a reason. And as we see that this is really a central issue, the story of John, who represents the Zealots eventually, and Josephus. And it's going to become more dramatic today. So, let's continue. He says, now the multitude of the Galileans had that great kindness for me, says Josephus, and faithfulness to me. Now remember, the two other priests have gone south. They've gone back to Jerusalem. They took their monies, their bribes from John of Giscala, right? Mm-hmm. And really the only two players left now are John and Josephus. Mm-hmm. And so he says, and they had faithfulness to me. And when their cities were taken by force, and their wives and their children carried off to slavery, they did not deeply lament for their own calamities, as they were solicitous for my preservation. So he's saying is when, in the end, their cities were taken, their wives were made slaves, their biggest concern was for my welfare. Quite remarkable. But when John saw this, he envied me, and he wrote to me, desiring that I would give him leave to come down and make use of the hot baths of Tiberias for the recovery of the health of his body. Right? So, John, he's been in struggles with the Romans. He's not so well. And he's saying, I need, Tiberias, even today, is very famous for their hot baths, right? And sulfur baths, and he needs this to recuperate. And so he asks permission from Josephus, who is in control of this part of the Galilee, can I come and rest my weary bones and spend some time on a spa? For the recovery of the health of my body. Accordingly, I did not hinder him, as having no suspicion of any wicked designs of his. And I wrote to those to whom I had committed the administration of the affairs of Tiberias by name, that they should provide lodgings for John, and for such as should come with him, and should procure him with necessities that he should stand in need of. Now at this time my abode was in a village of the Galilee, which is named Cana. So let's see where Cana is. Cana. Okay. So, just to get a sense, right? Giscala is up here, right? Tiberias is down here, and Cana is here. So it's quite close to Tiberias, right?
In the middle between the two
right, and
places.
Giscala is here, so he has to come down there, right? And from Cana, Josephus is kind of governing the area to the sea at this point, right? And it never occurs to him that John would have wicked plans. Because Josephus doesn't think that way. He thinks as a good person, other people are good people. The only flaw in this was that in the previous day's reading, right, he accused John of bribing people, specifically Kohanim, of being a profiteer, of selling products at 4 times their value to besieged cities. Right? But for some reason, it doesn't occur to him that he might have wicked plans here. I don't know. He sees the man favorably. And so he invited him to come to Tiberias.
Maybe it's just superficial.
He invited him to come to Tiberias and to enjoy the baths. Right? But when John was come to the city of Tiberias, he persuaded the men to revolt from their faithfulness to me, to separate from me, and to adhere to him. And many of them gladly received that invitation of his, as ever fond of innovations. Innovations is another word for rebellion in this case. Something new.
Instead of change.
Yeah.
Innovation.
Yeah. Of innovations, and by nature disposed to changes, and delighting in rebellions. But they were chiefly Justus and his father Pistus, that were earnest for their revolt from me, and their adherence to John. Now Justus, remember, was one of the priests, I think, who he thought had gone south, but I guess not. Right? But I came to them, and I prevented them. That is to say, prevented them from separating from me. For a messenger had come to me from Silas, whom I had made governor of Tiberias. So he had appointed, really the mayor of Tiberias, right? It's a city. Right? And Silas, who saw what was going on with John, that John wasn't really there for the hot baths. John was there Tiberias was a very important city, and that he was going to foment rebellion. First rebellion away from Josephus, the pacifist, and then rebellion, of course, against the Romans eventually. Silas, the mayor, who had been appointed by Josephus, was very nervous at this point. Remember, John is a very violent person as well. We've seen this before. So he sent a messenger to Cana, to where Josephus was, and told him, look, you made a big mistake allowing him to come here. This is just trouble. So a messenger came from Silas, whom I had made governor of Tiberias, and as I have said, and had told me of the inclinations of the people of Tiberias, and advised me to hurry there, for that if I made any delay, the city would come under another's jurisdiction. It's a very interesting phrase, because if the messenger had been captured, right, then maybe Silas could have said, well, I wasn't talking about you, John. There was another who I was worried about as well. I was warning Josephus about. He doesn't say under John's jurisdiction, under another's jurisdiction. Upon the receipt of this letter of Silas, I took 200 men along with me and traveled at night, having sent before a messenger to let the people of Tiberias know that I was coming to them. Right? So now you can imagine, right? The gates open in Cana, right? Horses come pouring out, armed with Josephus as the lead, right? 200 armed men heading to Tiberias, and before them a fleet-footed messenger telling the people of Tiberias, I'm on my way, right? And I expect proper behavior when I arrive. When I came near to the city, which was early in the morning, the multitude came out to meet me, and John came with them, and saluted me, but in a most disturbing manner. He wasn't respectful. There are many different kinds of salutes, right? We know some of them. As being afraid that my coming was to... so in a most disturbed manner, as being afraid that my coming was to call him to account for what I was now aware he was doing. So he knew why I was there. I wasn't just there to pick olives. So he, in great haste, went to his lodgings. He saluted me and then he hid himself. But when I was in the open space of the city, having dismissed the guards I had about me, excepting one, and 10 armed men that were with him, I attempted to make a speech to the multitude of the people of Tiberias. So you have the image, right? He arrives with 200 armed men, right? John, flips him the bird, right? So to speak, right? Not a respectful salute, and disappears. Now Josephus is quite confident, right? He ascends to a platform, and he tells his guards, I feel very safe. I'm with the people are with me. There's no need for you to protect me. And now he's by himself on the platform with maybe one other person. But around him are the people of Tiberias, right? And his guards are not right around him, his 200. Right? And now he's going to make a speech to the gathered people of Tiberias, right? Attempted to make a speech to the multitude of the people of Tiberias, and standing on a certain elevated place, I entreated them not to be hasty in their revolt. Such a change in their behavior would be to their reproach. They would then justly be suspected by those who should be their governors hereafter as not likely to be faithful to them. If you're treating me this way, and you're going to revolt against me and against the Romans, right, you should know eventually you're going to lose, and the powers that be will never trust you. Right? But before I had spoken, I heard one of my own servants bidding me come down, for that it was not a proper time to take care of retaining the goodwill of the people of Tiberias, but to provide for my own safety and escape my enemies there. So what happened? His guard says, look, they're not really here to hear what you have to say. It would be better if you stop talking and get moving, right? Because this looks more like a lynch mob to me, from what I hear, a lynch mob, right, than it does the gathered noble people of Tiberias. But to provide for my own safety and escape my enemies there. For John had chosen the most trustworthy of those armed men that were about him, out of those thousands that he had with him, and he had given them orders when he sent them to kill me, having learned that I was alone, excepting some of my servants. So those that were sent came as they were ordered, and they would have executed what they had come about, had I not leaped down from the elevation I stood on, and with one of my guards, whose name was James, been carried out of the crowd upon the back of one Herod of Tiberias, and guided by him down to the lake, where I seized a ship, got into it, and escaped my enemies unexpectedly, and came to Traitor. A daring escape, if I might say so. This seems to be one of the themes of Josephus. Remember, he escaped the shipwreck, right? Now he escapes the Jews of Tiberias, who have turned on him, and it seems quite daring, right? He jumps down, he's carried out by one of the soldiers whose name is Herod, interestingly.
Was there
right?
waiting for you.
No, it isn't. And he's carried, so where is he? Let me just show you where he went, right? He went from Cana, he's on the run. He went from Cana down to Traitor here, right? And he seized the ship. The ship wasn't waiting for him. There was a ship, right? He said, I'm the governor, that ship is mine. Right?
Stole the ship.
And pushed out into the lake, waving goodbye to the people of Tiberias and John of Gascala.
We're not talking about Mediterranean Sea, we're talking about
It's a big
Kinneret.
Yeah.
It's like
tiny.
Yeah, they could have run the other side and caught him again, right?
Exactly.
Right.
so tiny.
What?
It's so tiny.
It's tiny, but it's enough to cool them off.
It's like
right?
a puddle.
No, but what it means is that he's out of their physical hands, at this moment. Remember, he has 200 troops somewhere. You know,
Good question.
they're having a beer somewhere. I don't know,
In
right?
a bath. Everybody in a bath.
No, yeah, probably, right? But he had dismissed him. He said, I'm okay here, right? Not the best judgment, it seems, right? Anyway, he made this daring escape. He seized the ship, him and, James and maybe Herod of Tiberias, right? And pushed out into the lake, into the Sea of Galilee, right? And you could imagine the people are at the shore screaming at him, and he's moving away, right? So, because remember, if he actually succeeds in getting from here to here, right, then he's going to be in relatively safe hands at that point, right? Because that's, he has his own troops, right? Okay, so, I seized the ship and got into it and escaped my enemies unexpectedly and came to Traitor, which is a little bit north of Tiberias. Now, as soon as the inhabitants of that city, Traitor, understood the faithlessness of the people of Tiberias, they were greatly provoked at them. So they snatched up their weapons and desired me to be their leader against them. For they said they would avenge their commander's cause upon them. They also carried the report of what had been done to me to all the Galileans, and eagerly tried to irritate them against the people of Tiberias, and desired that vast numbers of them should get together and come to them, and that they might act in concert with their commander what would be determined as fit to be done. Accordingly, the Galileans came to me in great numbers. So now we see we're on the verge of a Jewish civil war, right? People of Tiberias on one side with John of Gascala, right? The people a little bit north of them, right, with Josephus, right? And they're getting ready.
Wasn't the north area of Gascala?
But that's right. In fact, Josephus is between Tiberias, right, and Gascala, right? You're absolutely right, because Tiberias is down here, Gascala is here, Cana and Trachea are here, right? So he sailed up to he sailed up to here, right? But in a sense, he's in a pincer, because here's Gascala, and here's where John of Gascala is, and he's up here, right? But he seems to have, in his own opinion, the vast majority of Galileans are on his side. They're flocking to him at this moment. Right?
That's what he thought.
The Galileans came to me in great numbers from all parts with their weapons, and they begged me to assault Tiberias and to take it by force and to demolish it until it lay even with the ground, and then to make slaves of its inhabitants with their wives and children. Those that were Josephus' friends also, he's now talking about in the third person, right? Those that were Josephus' friends also, who had escaped from Tiberias, gave him the same advice. Now we know probably the ones who escaped were either the citizens who might have been viewed as collaborators with the Romans, and also his own troops, right?
Why Romans? Was Gascala?
No, the ones who escaped from Tiberias, they got out from under the influence of John of Gascala and came to him.
But
right?
why Romans, you were saying?
Because the argument of John of Gascala is, I want to fight the Romans. And Josephus is wandering around saying, this is not the time, this is not the time, this is not the time. When is going to be the time? Right? I'm the leader who's willing to fight them. Right? But first I have to deal with Josephus. Right? Those who were Josephus' friends also and had escaped out of Tiberias gave him the same advice. But I did not comply with them, thinking it a terrible thing to begin a civil war among them. For I thought that this contention ought not to proceed further than words. So I told them that it was not for their own advantage to do what they would have me do, while the Romans expected no other than we should destroy one another by our mutual rebellions, by our mutual rebellions, and by saying this, I put a stop to the anger of the Galileans. He's a genuine peacemaker, right? Genuine peacemaker, right? I was treated badly by the people of Tiberias. The Galileans were unhappy with it because they loved me dearly, more than their wives and children, it seems. Right? But when it comes to, a fight between Jews, John is more than happy to do it. But not Josephus. Josephus will sacrifice his honor to keep peace among the Jews. Peace among the Jews. Yeah? But John was afraid for himself, right? So it doesn't look like I have attacked him. Now John's afraid of me because I have all these Galileans with him. Since his treachery had proved unsuccessful, well, Josephus had escaped. So he took the armed men that were about him and removed from Tiberias to Giscala, and wrote to me to apologize for what had been done, as if it had been done without his approval, and desired me to have no suspicion of him to his disadvantage. John wrote, if I had any idea that those people were going to do that to you, I would have nothing to do with it at all. And I'm willing to swear to it. Oaths and curses on me, if I'm not telling the truth. He also added oaths and certain horrible curses upon himself, and supposed he should be thereby believed in the points that he wrote about me. Right? God should strike Josephus down or John down if a word I'm saying is not true. Right? But now another great number of Galileans came together again. They're piling on with their weapons, as knowing the man, how wicked and how sadly perjured he was, and desired me to lead them against him, and promised me that they would utterly destroy both him and all of Giscala. Right?
First of all, it has nothing to do. They're constantly, and they're quite kровожадные, quite bloodthirsty.
Who is?
Whatever people of everything.
It seems there's only one person who's not bloodthirsty in this story. Would you say?
Yeah. Joseph, very peaceful peacemaker. You said.
He is a peacemaker.
It seems to be he's surrounded by people who want other people's blood, right? He's a violent
he was running in the middle of the night with 200 people toward Tiberias too.
Not to make war. Not to make war. Just to explain to them the importance of his point of view. Right? And to make sure that they hadn't been captured by the violent John of Giscala. Right? This does have a sense of a prejudicial view, even to me, at this point. It's hard to resist it. Is that, his description of events don't seem very even-handed to me, right? Because virtually every Jew in the story so far is like a violent character, with the exception of himself, right? And the two priests who were bribed and left.
That's right.
Right? They weren't honest.
Yeah, even when defend him, they're very bloodthirsty.
Yeah, and but part of what he's doing is he's saying, I am not John, right? John, if he has the opportunity, will kill me and kill my family and burn the city down, right? I have the opportunity. I have the support of the vast majority of Galileans, and I'm not using that opportunity to kill my brethren, right? So I'm very, very different than the Zealots are, right? And this will be a continuing theme for him, of course, right? Among other things, two things. One is I'm sensible. I know when the odds are too great, right? And the other is I'm moral, right? I'm not prepared, there's often the lines used that, Saddam Hussein was willing to fight to the last Iraqi, as if to say not about himself, but all the other people could die on his behalf, right? the Gaskala is being described that way, and Josephus is specifically separating himself from those thought processes. He's saying, I have the power, I have the weapons, I have the will, but that's not how I behave. Right? I'm not in favor of shedding blood.
Yeah.
Right? Wow. And so in doing so, he's saying we're not dealing with two equal forces that have a different philosophical view. Right? One says we should fight for freedom, and the other says we should preserve Jewish lives, both of great merit. Right? And clearly, if both leaders were equally meritorious, it wouldn't be such a clear decision as to which side we should be on. But on one side, you have somebody who is a despicable character. He's bribing public officials, he's bribing priests, he's a war profiteer, he betrays the faith of everybody around him, he lies to his fellow Jews, right? And also he has this different view. So I think he's Josephus successfully assassinated not just the character of John, but the character of a violent rebellion against Rome. Right? That it's not just senseless, right? That it is actually cruel and self-centered, is what he's saying. Now, I think many people would argue that that wasn't true. That there were many people who rebelled against Rome for very, very good reasons, right? And maybe their only failing was they didn't recognize that, that they would not win, which is a whole other question, to analyze later. Certainly in Bar Kokhba's time it came pretty close. But this is before that. But anyway, he's making an effort to say, look, these are not just people with different philosophical positions. This is an evil leader, and all of his traits are bad traits, right? Unlike mine. They're the opposite of mine, right? What are my traits? My traits are I'm always trying to find a way to avoid shedding blood. This is my nature. So he goes on to say, but I profess that I was obliged to them for their readiness to serve me, and that I would more than repay them their goodwill to me. However, I entreated them, I begged them to restrain themselves, and I begged them to give me leave to do what I intended, which was to put an end to these troubles without bloodshed. Right? We don't have to kill each other. Right? And he said it before, this is the Roman goal, is we should be killing each other. Right? And when I had prevailed with the multitude of the Galileans to let me do so, I came to Sepphoris. So this is coming to the end. I want to begin the next chapter because I want to leave everybody hanging a little bit. But so he now returns really to Sepphoris, which is all the way over here, right? Remember, most of the activities have been going on here, right? Now he sort of takes his leave and goes back to Sepphoris, which is a fortified city, and obviously a place where he has a lot of support. But he's also built support in here. But it's a question about how much support he has, right? Because clearly John has a lot of support as well. Now we have another problem, right? And we're going to deal more with this problem next week, but I just want to introduce it, right? So we have a group of Jews who are anxious to rebel, centered in Tiberias and centered around the man of John of Gaskala. We have Josephus, who was in Cana, right? Then he went to Tiberias. He was chased out of Tiberias, right? He went to Trachea, which is just a bit south of Tiberias, by boat, right? And ended up back in a governing position in Sepphoris, right? Or did he? So let's look at the beginning of the next chapter. But the inhabitants of this city, Sepphoris, having determined to continue in their allegiance to the Romans, were afraid of my coming to them. He's not having an easy time of it, right? Because in Tiberius, he's seen as a collaborator with the Romans. In Sepphoris, he's seen as a rebel who's going to bring trouble from the Romans to Sepphoris. The people of Sepphoris want to live with the Romans. They don't have any problem, right? Josephus decided to show up there and make that his center, right? The people who are living there are saying, wait a second, you think you're bringing us good news? We're okay with the Romans, and the Romans think you're connected somehow with Giscala and the rebellion, and your armed force showing up. We're not so sure that we want you here. Yeah?
But his ultimate intention probably to be with the Romans also.
So, but the inhabitants of this city, having determined to continue an allegiance to the Romans, were afraid of my coming to them, and tried by putting me upon another action to divert me, that they might be freed from the terror they were in. Accordingly, they sent Jesus, the captain of those robbers who were in the confines of the Ptolemies, and promised to give him a great deal of money if he would come with those forces he had with him, and which were in number 800, and fight against us. So now the people of Sepphoris have hired really a group of bandits, but a large group, 800, right? To deal with Josephus and his people. So Josephus is once more facing conflict now from the other side.
Right.
He's now being squeezed between the Jews who are loyal to Rome. In the American Revolutionary War, they would have been called the Loyalists. They were later called Canadians, right? Right? And in the on the other side, you have the rebels led by George Washington or John of Giscala, right? And in between are the sensible Americans in the Northeast
Who hire mafia.
who were born, maybe in Britain, and they don't really have that big a problem with the king. They can manage the situation. They may be a little wealthier. They have relationships. They're Americans, but they're also very comfortable. They have British accents, probably, And they see, that Patrick Henry of the Revolutionary Forces has decided to show up at their gates with, 25 of his Green Mountain boys, right? And they're going to be firing at the British, right? And they're saying, wait a second, we don't need this, right? And they get a gang of thugs, right, to start to chase them away, right? This is the world of Josephus, right? How will Josephus deal with those who are sympathetic to the Romans? Stay tuned, and we'll find out next week.
Right. Okay.